Have you ever wondered why, in a world overflowing with content, we seem to be thinking less instead of more? Why is it that entertainment, something meant to enrich our minds, might actually be dulling our ability to question and reflect? Imagine this. What you consider a harmless moment of relaxation, a show, a scrolling session, a funny clip, could slowly be eroding your capacity to think critically. What if the very thing you use to escape is quietly reshaping who you are, molding not only your habits, but the very way your mind works? Stay with me until the end, because I promise you'll learn to recognize the hidden signs of how entertainment is shaping your thoughts, and more importantly, how to take back control before it's too late. The decline in intellectual and cultural life we see today is not random. It is directly connected to what we might call an addiction to entertainment. And no one explained this danger more clearly than cultural critic Neil Postman in his classic book, Amusing Ourselves to Death, published back in 1985. Postman argued that television wasn't just giving us shows, it was changing our very relationship with reality. Politics, religion, education, even sports and commerce, everything was being transformed into entertainment. And because this happened with almost no resistance, society drifted into a dangerous state, distracted, superficial, and at risk of losing the very ability to think critically. He reminded us of something we often forget. Technology is never neutral. It always carries a hidden program of cultural change. Believing that its effects are only positive is a dangerous illusion. The television, Postman warned, didn't simply add new distractions. It rewired the way we process information, the way we interact, and ultimately, the way we perceive reality itself. Think about that for a moment. You don't experience concepts like intelligence, motivation, or ideology in some raw, objective form. You experience them through the lenses of the media you use. That means your mind doesn't just reflect reality, it interprets it, shaped by the metaphors and biases of the medium. In Postman's time, television was the central cultural machine. It became the control room of an entirely new era. But here's the chilling truth. His warning wasn't just about television. It was about every medium that prioritizes entertainment over depth. And if he was right, then our problem today, living in a world dominated by constant, flashy distractions, might be even worse than what he feared in the 1980s. So ask yourself, if your mind is being shaped every time you consume media, who's really in control? You or the screen in front of you? But that's only the beginning. Because once you understand how television changed the way we learn and think, you'll see why our modern flood of entertainment may be quietly dismantling the very foundations of culture itself. And the scariest part, you may not even notice it happening. For most of human history, learning was anchored in words. We gained knowledge through books, speeches, debates, and letters. It was slow, demanding, and often uncomfortable, but it required effort. Reading forced people to wrestle with ideas, to sit with abstractions, and to form connections on their own. Now imagine the shift when television arrived. Suddenly, knowledge was no longer tied to words. It was packaged in moving pictures, vivid colors, and catchy sound bites. The process of acquiring information became quick, visual, and entertaining. On the surface, that sounds like progress. But Neil Postman argued it came with a devastating cost, the erosion of deep, reflective thinking. Ask yourself, when was the last time you sat with a difficult book, rereading passages, struggling with an idea until it finally clicked? Compare that with how you watch TV or scroll on your phone. One experience demands focus, patience, and imagination. The other asks almost nothing. You lean back, you absorb, you're entertained. But you rarely struggle. And without struggle, the muscles of thought begin to weaken. Postman believed intelligence itself is tied to abstraction, to our ability to think without visual crutches. In literate cultures, people had to imagine complex ideas with no images to guide them. Words alone carried the weight. There was even a saying, "For the less intelligent, you have to draw it." In other words, those who couldn't process ideas abstractly needed pictures to make sense of them. But television flipped this entirely. Now everyone is given the picture first, whether they need it or not. Think about it. When you read, you actively construct meaning. You debate the text in your head, you pause, reread, and visualize. But when you watch television or its modern heirs, TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube Shorts, you become passive. The images arrive pre-packaged, leaving no room for your own interpretation. This shift is more than a matter of style. It changes the very texture of culture. Reading cultivates introspection. Watching cultivates passivity. Reading trains you to connect the dots. Watching trains you to expect someone else to do it for you. And here's the dangerous irony. Television democratized access to information. It brought knowledge to more people than ever before. But in simplifying learning, it also flattened it. Ideas were stripped of complexity, turned into easily digestible fragments, and once you grow used to shallow fragments, the deep waters of thought feel exhausting, even irrelevant. So here's the uncomfortable question. Are we really more informed today, or just more distracted? Is what we call knowledge actually little more than scattered puzzle pieces? Pieces we never put together into a full picture? Because according to Postman, this is the trap. When every subject is filtered through entertainment, seriousness itself disappears. Politics, science, religion, even education, everything becomes spectacle. And once everything is spectacle, nothing feels worth taking seriously. But as alarming as that sounds, we haven't even reached the darkest consequence yet. Because when a culture begins to mistake entertainment for truth, the very meaning of being informed starts to collapse. And that's where the real danger begins. Picture this. Every evening, you sit in front of a glowing screen. The world's most urgent issues, politics, wars, religion, economics, are presented in bright colors, catchy headlines, and dramatic music. It feels serious. It feels important. But Neil Postman warned us, beneath the surface, something else is happening. Television, he argued, doesn't just deliver information, it transforms it. The visual language of the screen is built for entertainment, not for careful reasoning. As a result, even the most profound subjects are repackaged as spectacle. Complexity is stripped away. Seriousness dissolves into sound bites. And here's the chilling effect. You begin to confuse being entertained with being informed. Think about political debates today. Once upon a time, leaders were known for their speeches and writings, for the power of their ideas. America's earliest presidents, Postman noted, probably could have walked down the street without being recognized. They were remembered for their words, not their faces. But in the television age, everything changed. Leaders were no longer judged by the depth of their reasoning, but by their image. Did they look confident? Did they smile enough? Was their voice pleasing? Suddenly, elections began to resemble popularity contests. The packaging mattered more than the product. Doesn't that sound eerily familiar today, in the age of Instagram politics and Twitter wars? Candidates aren't just politicians anymore. They're brands. They perform for the camera, shape-shifting into whatever the audience wants to see. It's less about truth and more about presentation. And it's not only politics. Religion, too, has been reshaped. Centuries-old rituals, profound theologies, sacred traditions, all of it compressed into feel-good moments designed for television. Faith becomes performance, spirituality becomes spectacle. The weight and mystery that once defined religion are replaced with flashy slogans and quick emotional hits. Even the news, The place we once turned to for facts no longer escapes this logic. News programs promise to inform us, but what do they really do? They entertain us. Stories are shortened, dramatized, given flashy graphics and sensational headlines. What you get is not a deeper understanding of the world, but an endless stream of fragments, pieces that never connect. This is what Postman called disinformation. Not lies, not propaganda, something subtler and perhaps more dangerous. Disinformation is information stripped of context, presented in ways that confuse rather than clarify. You think you're gaining knowledge, but in reality, you're left with fragments too shallow to form true understanding. Ask yourself, how often do you finish watching the news and feel enlightened? And how often do you feel merely stimulated, like you've consumed something but can't quite explain it later? That's the illusion of knowledge, and it's one of the most dangerous addictions of our age. Because here's the terrifying part. Once you normalize entertainment as your main source of truth, you lose the ability to tell the difference between being informed and being entertained. And when that line blurs, society itself begins to unravel. But if you think this is already alarming, just wait. Because Postman didn't stop at politics or religion. He argued that this obsession with entertainment is quietly shaping the entire cultural fabric of our lives. And what he saw coming next is even more disturbing. Neil Postman pointed out a cultural shift so massive that most people never noticed it happening because it was wrapped in pleasure. He argued that once television became our main cultural lens, everything, from politics to education to religion, was reframed as spectacle. The goal was no longer truth, wisdom, or meaning. The goal was to keep you watching. And when the primary goal of a society is to keep you watching, something terrifying happens. Depth gives way to distraction. Think of it this way. Before television, a politician was respected for their arguments. A preacher was remembered for their teachings. A scientist was valued for their discoveries. But in the television age, they are all forced to become performers. Their worth is no longer tied to their ideas, but to their ability to hold attention. Do you see the danger? When the spotlight rewards only performance, substance slowly dies in the shadows. Postman called this an infantilization of public discourse, a culture that treats citizens like children. Instead of being challenged with complex questions, we are spoon-fed bite-sized entertainment. Instead of real debate, we get catchy slogans. Instead of intellectual struggle, we get emotional sugar rushes. And the result? A nation that risks becoming nothing more than a stage, where every serious conversation is replaced by showmanship. But here's what makes this even scarier. This transformation doesn't just affect the culture. It affects you. The way you interact with others, the way you process information, even the way you measure your own worth, all of it gets bent by the logic of entertainment. Conversations become shallow. We chase quick laughs instead of genuine connection. We discuss celebrities, not ideas. Even our sense of being informed gets distorted. The more headlines we consume, the smarter we feel, but in reality, we're drowning in fragments that never add up to true understanding. Postman used a powerful metaphor. Imagine trying to solve a jigsaw puzzle, but only being handed random pieces, without ever seeing the full picture. That's what it's like to live in a culture where every subject is reduced to entertainment, pieces without context, images without depth, stories without meaning. And here's the cruelest trick of all. Because the package is so pleasurable, we don't even recognize the decline. We think we're enlightened because we're consuming information. But we're not consuming wisdom. We're consuming distraction. Postman wasn't just describing television, he was diagnosing a pattern of culture itself. And if his warning was accurate in the 1980s, then in today's world of TikTok, Instagram, Netflix, and YouTube, we may already be living inside the very nightmare he predicted. Because once entertainment becomes the foundation of culture, truth itself begins to dissolve. But what if I told you that Postman wasn't the only one who saw this coming? Another visionary, Aldous Huxley, warned of a world where people wouldn't be destroyed by oppression, but seduced by pleasure. And that's where Postman's analysis takes an even darker turn. When people think of dystopias, most remember George Orwell's 1984. A world of censorship, book burnings, constant surveillance, and oppressive control. A nightmare where truth is hidden, and people are crushed into obedience by fear. But Neil Postman made a striking observation. Perhaps Orwell wasn't the prophet of our time. Perhaps the real warning came from Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. Huxley imagined something very different. In his vision, there was no need to burn books, because no one wanted to read them anymore. There was no need for censorship, because people drowned in trivial distractions. Control didn't come through pain. It came through pleasure. And Postman feared Huxley was right. Think about it. In a world where entertainment is endless, who needs oppression? You don't have to chain people if they chain themselves to the screen. You don't have to silence truth if nobody bothers to listen. Why fight to control knowledge if distraction makes people indifferent to knowledge altogether? That's the terrifying possibility Postman pointed to. Orwell's nightmare was fear. Huxley's nightmare was amusement. And amusement, Postman argued, might be the more powerful prison. Look around you. We live in an age where distraction is not a side effect. It's the main event. We carry devices that deliver infinite entertainment, 24 hours a day. You can watch, scroll, and laugh your way through life without ever pausing to reflect. Doesn't that sound disturbingly close to Huxley's prophecy? And here's the subtle danger. Fear wakes you up. If someone takes away your freedom, you feel it. But pleasure lulls you to sleep. You don't notice the decline because it feels good. You don't resist because you're entertained. That's why Postman described our cultural decline as silent. It doesn't arrive with a bang. It arrives with laughter. It doesn't announce itself with violence. It sneaks in wrapped in joy. And that, he believed, is what makes it more dangerous than Orwell's vision. Now pause for a moment and ask yourself, are we already living in Huxley's world? When you scroll endlessly through TikTok, binge-watch a season in a single night, or chase one viral clip after another, are you exercising freedom or surrendering it? Here's the haunting part. Postman warned that what we love could destroy us more effectively than what we fear. Not censorship, but distraction. Not pain, but pleasure. And maybe the scariest question of all is this. If you've been trapped in a prison of fear, you'd fight to escape. But what happens when you live in a prison of entertainment and you actually enjoy the walls? Because that's the question Postman leaves hanging in the air. Will our love of amusement quietly undo us? If Postman's warning feels prophetic, it's because the evidence is all around us. We live in a culture where distraction is constant, where news is consumed like entertainment, and where meaning is flattened into memes and sound bites. And the most unsettling part, most of us barely notice. But here's the hopeful twist. If entertainment has the power to shape us, then awareness has the power to free us. Imagine for a moment you're walking through an ancient library. The air smells of dust and old parchment. Light falls across shelves stacked with volumes that hold the wisdom of centuries. Each book is a world in itself, slow, deep, demanding. Now picture how different that feels from scrolling through endless feeds of quick videos and headlines. Which one feels like it builds you, and which one feels like it drains you? The truth is, reclaiming depth in an age of distraction isn't easy. It requires intention. It means choosing moments of silence over constant noise. It means opening a book and wrestling with difficult ideas instead of surrendering to whatever the algorithm serves next. It means remembering that being informed is not the same as being entertained. Postman's challenge still matters today. Are you content to live in a society that treats you like an audience member? Or do you want to live as a thinker, a participant, a human being capable of reflection? And here's where it gets personal. Because the story isn't just about culture in some abstract sense. It's about you. Every time you choose reflection over distraction, you strengthen your ability to think. Every time you resist the easy hit of entertainment, you protect your own freedom. Every time you decide to question instead of consume, you fight back against the silent decline. But this isn't only about your mind. It's about your relationships, your choices, your future. When you escape the prison of entertainment, you open yourself to real connection with others, with ideas, and with yourself. And maybe, just maybe, that's how cultural renewal begins. Not with grand revolutions, but with individuals who refuse to be lulled into silence by laughter. So let me leave you with this question. Will you let entertainment define who you are, or will you take back control of your attention, your mind, and your culture? Because if Postman was right, then our future depends not on what we fear, but on what we love. And if we keep loving distraction more than truth, the decline will continue unnoticed, one laugh at a time. But if we choose differently, if we choose reflection over noise, then perhaps we can prove Postman wrong. And maybe, just maybe, the story of our culture won't end with amusement, but with awakening.